So let's go back to the article to look at the remaining three criteria. And here's what they said, that the authors of this article, have tested for the three remaining criteria, which are the production of comparable disease in the original host species or a related one, re-isolation of the virus, and detection of a specific immune response to the virus. So since they didn't satisfy the first criteria, they didn't have anything isolated, it would be next to impossible to satisfy these three, but let's see what they said they did. So criterion 4, produced the same disease in the host. So they did not obtain material from patients with the natural disease. Instead, they used the virus that was cultured in monkey kidney cells. So once again, those cells would be producing exosomes, and the virus was never isolated, so it's not really clear what exactly they're inoculating them with at all. However, out of those 2 macaques, and they only did this with 2, only one of them had respiratory symptoms. So in other words, even if you say that they really did inoculate them with something they isolated from a sick person, they didn't cause the same disease in both of the hosts, only in one of them. And the other one, they had a skin rash. And even when they examined their lungs at autopsy, because of course they killed these animals right after the experiment, they found different findings. One had extensive lung pathology and the other one did not. So criterions 5 and 6, re-isolation of the virus and specific immunity. So they did not re-isolate the virus. Instead, what they did was genetic testing. And once again, they took secretions from those macaques and mixed them with vero cells in culture with antibiotics, just as the original procedure. So there was no isolation in that. And they did say that there was an antibody response, but they did not describe the specificity of that or test it against other antigens to determine that. So in conclusion, they met 0 of the 6 criteria. So let me just summarize, because there are several misrepresentations in that article. So first, in the title, they said they satisfied Cox postulates, but in the second paragraph, they said actually they used Rivers' revision of the Cox postulates, which are distinct. And then they claimed that 4 papers satisfied the first 3 criteria, but upon closer examination of those papers, not one criteria for any of those papers was satisfied. And then they claimed that they satisfied the remaining 3 criteria, but once again, upon closer examination of their procedures, they did not satisfy any of them. So this is what I would consider a fraudulent paper, because they cannot provide any evidence to back up any of the claims they made in their paper. And it's very, very misleading. So I thought I would look at some of these Rivers criteria for COVID-19, because this is the most relevant thing to what's going on now and what I've been mostly spending my time studying and talking about. And it would be very easy to apply these to the papers that have described COVID-19, which, by the way, is based on the original SARS coronavirus. So these are the 3 papers that have been published on 1, 2, 3. And then the 4th one is a group from Canada that has reported to some news media that they have also isolated this COVID-19 virus, but they have not published yet. So there's much less information about their specific methods, but there was enough to know what's going on. So let's look at, so out of what I found is that none of the studies met the first 3 criteria. No studies tried to address criterion 4 or 5, which is inoculating the isolated particle into a healthy host and causing the disease, or re-isolating it from that person. So this was just not done at all, not attempted. So if criterion 4 and 5 were never attempted, you can already, just from that, conclude that it has not been proven to be fairly confident even that this is a cause of any illness. But let's look a little bit closer. So the Zhao paper, they didn't isolate any virus. Once again, they obtained genetic material as described in the previous procedure. Number 2, they did not cultivate in host cells. They used, once again, vero cells and this other HUH7 cells but they only did this in 1 out of the 7 patients, and they did not prove filterability. And here's what they wrote in their conclusions. This study provides evidence of an association between the disease and the presence of the virus. However, there are still many urgent questions to be answered. We need more clinical data and samples to confirm if this virus is indeed the etiology agent for this epidemic. And etiology means cause. So basically they said we need more studies to prove causation. This only provides evidence of an association. And there's still many questions to answer. So the authors of this article were very honest and understood the limitations of their research methods and put an appropriate conclusion. They did something else interesting, and I want to just talk about the genetic material for a moment, because this is what they really say is the reason why they've identified it, and it's also the reason or the basis for developing this diagnostic test. The RT-PCR test is basically just tests this genetic sequence. So the way that they said that it's a coronavirus is because they tested the sequence of this RNA that they can't identify the source because they didn't purify anything. And they said it shares just under 80% sequence identity to the SARS-CoV-1, which I was talking about earlier. Now, 80% may sound like a lot, but I did some digging and found that humans share 96%, so 16% more of their genetic sequence with chimpanzees. So if you were to say that 80% sequence identity means that it's a coronavirus, well, you'd be saying that if you had a DNA sample from me and compared it to chimpanzee sequences, you would say that I was a chimpanzee, which clearly I am not. So let's move on to the next of the 3 papers. So the Zhu paper. Once again, no virus was isolated. They obtained genetic material. They didn't cultivate in host cells, and this time they used lung cancer cells. Now, they don't call it that in the paper. What they say is that they are lung epithelial cells taken from biopsies of lung cancer patients. Now, I don't think it takes too much to realize that there are going to be cancer cells in there. And one thing that we know about cancer cells is that they make lots of exosomes. So this would provide particles that could be seen under the microscope and confused with other particles. And once again, they did not prove filterability. And this is what they said in their conclusion. So once again, an honest author. Although our study does not fulfill Koch's postulate, so they acknowledge that outright, our analyses provide evidence implicating 2019 nCoV in the Wuhan outbreak. So we have association, and we have implication. So this is nowhere near causation. This is preliminary findings that basically suggest that you need to do some more studies and actually apply the Rivers criteria if you want to prove causation. Now, the third paper is a little bit more problematic, but I'll get to that in a second. But if you look at the methods, once again, they did not isolate any virus. Once again, they did not cultivate in host cells. They used vero cells and antibiotics and did not prove filterability. However, I want to describe the McMaster team first because, like I said, they don't have a published paper, so I can't say a lot, but they did describe their methods a little bit on their website. And once again, they did not isolate a virus, and they also did not cultivate in host cells. They're using some other kind of mammalian cells, which is the same procedure every group is using. But back to the Kim paper, because the Kim paper has something really problematic. And this doesn't come from the conclusion, it comes from the introduction section. And in their introductory section, they said basically that a new coronavirus was identified as the causative agent of this unexplained pneumonia in January 2020. Now, this is a very bold statement. And as you saw, the conclusions of the other 2 papers, which came before this, didn't make any such statements based on their research. So this is reference number 7, is where this declarative statement about it being a causative agent comes from. And that reference is listed at the bottom of this slide. And interestingly, it's not a study that is trying to isolate or identify a virus. It's a study that's looking at the full sequence of the genetic material of this so-called virus and comparing it with evolutionary analysis. So in other words, with other species or viruses sequences found in other species. So in other words, the science of that article would not be able to prove anything about causation. So I went and looked at that article, and interestingly, it doesn't say anything about causation anywhere. In the introduction, it says that a novel coronavirus is associated with human-to-human transition and severe human infection. So once again, association is not causation. And in its conclusion, it talks about the genetic features of the virus and their potential association with virus characteristics and virulence in humans remain to be elucidated. So in other words, there's some kind of association. We need more research. We haven't proven anything. So how did they say this? They must have just basically flat out lied. They made this up. They said it's a causative agent. They gave a reference, and it's not in the reference. And in my opinion, this should be censured. I mean, this is a serious ethical violation here to make such an important claim. All of the world policies are based upon this claim that it is a causative agent, and they cannot reference any science to back that up whatsoever. If we go on and look again at that McMaster University article, which is on the university website, they also make a bold claim, perhaps following on Kim's paper, saying that this new coronavirus set in motion the pandemic. So that's even a bigger claim than it being the cause of an illness. So you see, once a rumor is put out there, then other people are going to adopt it, and then it's going to become in people's minds the truth, even though there's nothing to back it up. So just to summarize the whole rumor mill thing, we have the papers that actually did the studies, and they claim that there's an association or an implication of the virus in the illness, far from any declarative statement about causation. Then in the third paper, it was changed to causative agent, and then it was changed to set in motion the pandemic. So stronger and stronger statements. And no evidence was provided at all to back up those statements. Just flat out lies. So I'd like to conclude from everything I talked about that one, despite the claim of satisfying Koch's postulates, not one of the 6 Rivers criteria was met for SARS. Not one. That's in 2003. None of the Rivers criteria were met for COVID-19, except possibly specific immunity, the least important of the 6 criteria. And rumors and lies placed COVID-19 as the cause of a pandemic with no proof whatsoever. Just want to highlight the players here. And please do connect with me at my website, andrewkaufmanmd.com. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you next time.